doors be open? Que l'on ouvre les portes. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share with you about a dear friend of mine and a leader in my community, Kari Coco. Kari was deeply caring, brilliant, invested her whole self in the betterment of our community, from social work to community theatre. Sadly, we recently lost Kari to depression and an anxiety disorder that made the future so bleak for her that she saw no point in going on living. On behalf of our entire community, we extend our condolences to Maggie, John, and the extended Coco family. Just weeks prior, I learned of another young friend, David, who took his own life as well. Organizations like the Waterloo Region Suicide Prevention Council are more critical today than ever, so they can support those thinking about suicide, provide resources for those supporting others, and for those coping with grief from suicide loss. Suicide can be prevented, and help is available. We all have a role to play. Let's also keep Kari and David's families in our hearts as we push for increased mental health resources so they might be accessible to anyone who needs them, without wait times, early discharge, discrimination, or cost. Thank you.
The honourable member for Scarborough North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to honour the life of Cynthia Lai, the City Councillor for Scarborough, who tragically passed away last Friday afternoon. Councillor Lai emigrated from Hong Kong in 1972 and built a successful career in real estate sales and management here in Canada. She became the first Chinese-Canadian woman to serve as president of the Toronto Real Estate Board. Elected to Toronto City Council in 2018, Councillor Lai was a voice for the unheard and underrepresented. A relentless advocate for the Scarborough subway, she filled every room with energy, positivity, and big ideas. Last Friday, Councillor Lai was on a clear path to re-election in Monday's municipal election when she lost her battle with cancer. On behalf of the people of Scarborough North, I extend my deepest condolences to her family, her husband, C.K. Fung, and their two sons, Derek and Darren. Councillor Lai is dearly missed. May she rest in peace.
The honourable member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government's incompetent, insensitive, voodoo economic management is crushing everyday Canadians. More debt has been added by this Prime Minister than all Prime Ministers before him combined. The Liberals said that because interest rates were rock bottom, no big deal to print billions.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment. Okay, we're having a translation problem. Are we hearing the translation in French? Est-ce que la traduction est...
Is interpreting working into English?
Oui, c'est beau. The honourable member from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government's incompetent, insensitive, voodoo economic management is crushing everyday Canadians. More debt has been added.
We seem to be having a problem with... Okay, is that parler?
I'm going to speak in English.
In French, is it working? No. Is everyone not hearing me, or is it just the one member? Tout le monde n'entend pas. Okay, on a un problème technique.
We are having a technical problem. We'll have to take a couple of seconds to figure out what is going on.
King and Nelson. One moment. Just to clarify, just pour clarifier, I don't know if you can hear me yet. OK. Alors, ce qu'on a fait...
What we have done is we have discovered that there are 2 rows at the front who have interpretation, but there is an issue with the back rows. The pages are coming with new portable devices, with new earpieces, so we will try and make the system work. We will suspend just a couple of seconds, just a couple of minutes perhaps, until the technical issue is resolved.
Thank you for your patience. À l'ordre. À l'ordre.
Order. Everything is working. We will continue with the SO31s.
The honourable member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government's incompetent, insensitive, voodoo economic management is crushing everyday Canadians. More debt has been added by this Prime Minister than...
I'm sorry, it's... Est-ce que ça fonctionne? Is it working?
No, it's going to work.
There's no English either. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I feel like I'm doing a commercial for a cell phone. What's that? Oh, can you hear what I'm saying through your earpiece? Oh, OK, je vais parler en français.
So I'm now going to speak French. So everyone, can you hear interpretation into English? But you can't hear interpretation into French.
There's no translation in the back benches by the looks of it. You put the...
English, checking English, English. Checking English, 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 English.
OK, ça fonctionne en arrière. You're hearing me OK? How about over here? Nothing back here.
Checking English, English, English.
How about this side? You can hear me? Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear interpretation into English?
English, 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 English,
We have some portable
English, English.
units that you'll be using. OK, je vais l'essayer tout de suite.
I will try straight away. Can you hear me into English? Can you hear the interpretation into English? Can you hear the interpretation into English? Please confirm. Interpretation, does it work into English? Yes, it is working into English.
On va l'essayer encore.
So let's try this once again.
Does this ever happen to other speakers, or am I the only one who's the target for technology? The honourable member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government, incompetent, insensitive, voodoo economic management is crushing everyday Canadians. More debt has been added by this Prime Minister than all Prime Ministers before him combined. The Liberals said that just because interest rates were rock bottom, no big deal to print billions, which shot up the price of homes, gas, groceries, and goods. Inflation is at 40-year highs. Now they're saying, whoopsie, just time to jack up interest rates, financially stressing out new home buyers who purchase at inflated prices. Nancy at our local food bank tells me that thousands of people are coming there struggling, and she hasn't seen this sort of thing happen before. So what will the Liberals do? They're going to triple the carbon tax on home heating and fuel, and for good measure increase home EI premiums by 10%. Has Canada ever seen a more out-of-touch government? Thank you.
The honourable member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you. I'm delighted, Mr. Speaker, to rise this afternoon to highlight the work of community land trusts. Over the past few days, the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts, a newly formed umbrella network that advocates for local land trusts at the national level, has been holding a summit here in Ottawa. These community-based organizations are at the forefront of local action on conservation and climate change. With programs like the Land Trust Conservation Fund, part of the much larger Natural Heritage Conservation Program, our government has invested $20 million through these local land trusts. This government investment has been more than doubled, tripled. It was actually quadrupled by the money these have raised from private funds. These monies supported over 40 organizations, 116 projects, and protected over 13,000 hectares of nature reserves since 2019. The return on the $20 million invested by our government has been phenomenal due to the work these land trusts have done. The success of our government and country in meeting our environmental goals, both emissions reduction and biodiversity protection, depends on all these local land trusts, boards, volunteers, and donors. For that, Mr. Speaker, our government joins with me in thanking the new Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts and their member organizations greatly. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Once again, is interpretation coming through?
Into French again, so we've got portable units being passed around. Is there anybody else who who can't hear me in French right now? You're not hearing? Okay, the page, if we can go over there. Alors, est-ce que tout le monde peut
So can everyone hear me into English when I speak French? Can everyone hear me into English?
hear me in French? Oui. Tout va bien.
Everything is good. I see thumbs up. Perfect. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight the story of the miners of Saint-Rémy-d'Amherst and their families. The release of the documentary The Silicosis Affair, directed by Bruno Carrière, sheds light on the tragedy of this first industrial disease in Quebec in the 30s and 40s. It is thanks to the Franco-American journalist Bertrand Ledoux that we know the scope of the ravages caused by silicosis. This caused the death of dozens of miners. My apologies. You don't have interpretation at the back? So can I have some portable interpretation receivers?
We'll be bringing them to you in a few seconds. It's going to be the longest period I think we've had in a long time for questions. Okay, there we go. So no, it is.
No, we can hear it this time, maybe.
Okay, if anyone cannot hear me in one of the official languages, si vous pouvez pas.
If you can't hear me in one of the two official languages, please raise your hands.
And we'll have someone come to you with a unit. It seems to be it's the back four. C'est les derniers.
It seems to be the back four rows that are having technical issues on my left. But I think that everyone can hear me now.
Okay, on va laisser.
All right. Well, let's try again. The Honourable Member for Laurentides-Labelle. Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to highlight the history of the Saint-Rémy-d'Amherst miners and their families. The documentary The Silicosis Affair, directed by Bruno Carrière, sheds light on the tragedy of the first industrial disease in Quebec in the 30s and 40s. It's thanks to the investigative work by the Franco-American journalist Bertin Ledoux that we know the ravages caused by silicosis, an illness that caused the death of dozens of miners in Saint-Rémy-d'Amherst. That was nicknamed at the time the Village of Widows. The Silicosis Affair is a powerful and moving documentary that recounts the years of years when Quebec workers were victims of dangerous working conditions. So to better understand what these people lived, I invite you to watch the broadcast of L'Affaire Silicose, the Silicosis Affair, the first major scandal in Quebec's social history. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pélan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The month of October 2022 sees Canada celebrating 75 years of bilateral relations with Italy. The two countries have common positions on important regional and international issues. We share common values of democracy, freedom, respect of human rights, and an international order based on the rule of law. More than 1.5 million Canadians are of Italian origin and form a vibrant and dynamic community that participates in all aspects of our bilateral relationship, including culture, economy, trade, science, and technology. It's almost a perfect match.
On behalf of the Canada-Italy Inter-Parliamentary Group, I invite you all to join us tonight from 5 to 7 at the Speaker's Dining Room 233S, West Block, for a celebration of this milestone with His Excellency Andrea Ferrari, Ambassador of Italy. And yes, there will be Italian food.
Yay!
Hope to see you all in great numbers.
The Honourable Member for Caribou, Prince George.
After a hiatus of 2 years, the National Diwali celebration is returning to Parliament Hill today. With the support of our Indo-Canadian friends, community organizations, and mandeers from across our country, tonight at 6:30 p.m., I'm delighted to be hosting the 22nd National Diwali celebration at the Sir John A. Macdonald Building. I hope all my colleagues will join us. The Diwali celebration on Parliament Hill was started by our dear friend, the late Honourable Deepak O'Brien. With this inaugural event, Canada became the first Western democracy to celebrate Diwali in Parliament in 1998. We continue this tradition by joining hands across political boundaries to light the Diwali lamp in a gesture that symbolizes the banishment of darkness and the ushering in of light, peace, and hope. Let the National Diwali celebration be a truly Canadian tradition where South Asian and Indo-Canadians will join hands with the rest of Canada to share the message of Diwali. Let there be light. Happy Diwali, everyone.
L'honorable député de Saint-Laurent.
The Honourable Member for Saint Laurent.
Misdiagnosed 30% more often than men. This gender gap in medicine stems from the lack of knowledge of women's medical conditions and experiences. That's why I'm thrilled that our government just launched the National Women's Health Research Initiative and invested of $20 million to enhance health outcomes for women and eliminate gaps. In the past, researchers excluded women from participating in early phase drug trials in case they would accidentally fall pregnant during the trial. And women were generally left out of medical research because their hormonal cycles would complicate results. This led to the complete neglect of conditions that primarily affect women, such as ovarian cancer and endometriosis. Another factor contributing to this gender gap is the lack of trust in women to report on their own health. When doctors can't explain why a female patient is in pain, she's told that she's under stress, suffers from depression, or that it's hormonal. Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable. Women's Caucus considers this a top priority and asks that women in Canada who agree to please stand up.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Today's youth are tenacious, determined, and they get the...
Okay, I want to remind the Honourable Members, if they have an earpiece, not to put it near the microphone, because then there's some feedback that happens. Today's the day for technology learning. So, the Honourable Member for St. John's East from the top, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's youth are tenacious, determined, and they get the job done. And nowhere was that better.
Okay, let's... Let's try that again.
Pick it up.
The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Thank you. Today's youth are tenacious, determined.
Honourable Opposition Whip.
The translations seem to be spreading, and they have run out of mobile translators. So at the moment, there's a number of us who have no translation.
Okay, if I can have all those who do not have translation, can you please raise your hand?
I don't.
Okay, ceux qui n'ont pas la traduction.
Those who don't have interpretation, please raise your hand.
Please keep your hands up. There are portable units coming your way. S'il vous plaît, s'il vous plaît.
Please keep your hand up. If you don't have interpretation, and someone will come by with a portable interpretation receiver.
Lève ta main. Ouais, OK, parfait. Okay, let's try this again. Now, what happens is, I just want everybody to know, j'aimerais que tout le monde sache,
I would like everyone to know
should have a portable unit if your translation or your interpretation unit is not working on your desk. If you don't have one, or if something goes wrong during a question period, please raise your hand. No need to stand up, but just raise your hand. We have pages and table officers looking out for any hands that go up, and they'll come to you with a brand new unit, and then you can get started. I see some thumbs going on. Alors, tout le monde.
So, everyone, if you have an issue with your unit, raise your hand, and we have people keeping an eye out and who will bring you a new receiver.
Don't get me started. The Honourable Member for St. John's East.
Mr. Speaker,
Today's youth are tenacious, determined, and they get the job done. And nowhere was that better displayed than at the recent 25th annual Newfoundland and Labrador Youth Ventures Awards. Youth Ventures Newfoundland and Labrador supports young people in turning their hobbies, interests, and passions into profitable ventures. Today's Youth Ventures are tomorrow's emerging startups, thriving small businesses, and growing employers. And this program installs an entrepreneurial spirit to support a prosperous Newfoundland and Labrador. The award ceremony recognized the best ventures from this year, and I want to send my sincere congratulations to all the winners, especially Venture of the Year winner Dawson Green of Greenhead Growers from Lords and Anna Ryan of Seriously Doe in Placentia for outstanding ventures 17 years and younger. Youth Ventures is a CBDC program, and it helped start over 4,500 businesses. To all the participants of Youth Venture Awards, you have so much to be proud of. Our future is in great hands. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Battle River, Crowfoot.
Canadians cannot afford this costly NDP Liberal coalition, and that is no more evident than with food. A few facts for you. Fact, food inflation in Canada hits its fastest growth in September since August 1981, when the first Trudeau was in office. Fact, food purchased from stores is up 11.4% year over year. And fact, food banks are seeing record demand as prices soar. The Liberals triple tax hikes, fertilizer cuts, and back-breaking gatekeepers are bankrupting farmers and ranchers and outsourcing food production to other countries, which then require the burning of fuel to get it back to Canada when we should be growing, raising, and preparing it here. Mr. Speaker, here's a final fact for you. A Conservative government under our new leader will repeal these taxes, remove the fertilizer mandates, and get the gatekeepers out of the way so that we can grow affordable food, feed our people, and be the breadbasket of the world.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury.
Speaker, October marks Women's History Month. In honour of this, I want to highlight the important work being done by Politics Now, an organization in my riding of Sudbury. Politics Now empowers and supports women to become political leaders in communities across Northern Ontario. In the last municipal election, Politics Now supported over 46 women by providing training sessions, campaign schools, and hosting events for women to connect and learn. In Ontario's municipal election held this week, 60 women ran in Northern Ontario's 9 cities. 26 women were elected to municipal council, and 1 was the first elected woman mayor in a Northern Ontario city since 2014. Mr. Speaker, organizations like Politics Now are making an impact for women across the country. I want to acknowledge and congratulate the incredible work being done by Amanda Kingsley-Mallow and Politics Now to get even more women elected and have better representation across Northern Ontario.
The Honourable Member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
$6,739. $6,739. That's the heat bill facing a typical family using oil heat in rural Ontario and rural Atlantic Canada this coming winter. That's frightening, Mr. Speaker. And they've got no alternative. There's no natural gas. Electric resistance heat is just as expensive, and heat pumps won't work at -20 in homes built before the 1980s, whether ground source or air source. Nous avons demandé au gouvernement de les aider.
They have refused to help them. It is the only G7 government that has increased taxes on energy.
It's getting away with it because the NDP is letting them. Canadians can't afford this costly agreement between the NDP and Liberals, and they certainly can't afford to pay $6,739 to heat their homes this coming winter.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna, Lake country.
Mr. Speaker, once again, Canadians have been slammed by another punishing interest rate hike of 0.5, bringing interest rates to 3.75%. All of this brought in to combat the inflation caused by this Prime Minister. Residents know it has never been more expensive to buy a home in Canada that has just been under this Liberal government, and housing prices have doubled during their 7 years in power, with a typical single-family home in my region hovering around $1 million. Nationwide, the average Canadian now spends 60% of their income on home ownership costs alone. Under this Prime Minister, Toronto has become the #1 housing bubble in the world, where it's more expensive to buy a home than New York, Hong Kong, or San Francisco. Vancouver is not far behind at the 6th highest. And it's not just homeowners who are struggling to make ends meet due to this Liberal inflation. The average rent in Canada is now over $2,000 a month, a yearly increase of over 15%. This is not sustainable. We have a plan as a Conservative government to take action to address this housing crisis.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges.
Incredible work of Beth Woods and her team at Gift from the Harp. Bev Woods opened her first dental hygiene office in Trenton, Ontario, as a location for her community to receive free care. Dismayed by the fact that many couldn't access the free services she offered, she founded Gift from the Heart and the flagship Outreach mobile community cruiser, a refurbished and repurposed ambulance, to ensure that there were no barriers to accessing oral health care.
Last September, Bev and her team set up a mobile clinic in the town of Pincourt to provide free dental care to seniors, social workers and Ukrainians recently arrived in Canada. They were greeted and served by dental hygienists Joy Madarazzo, Roshni Desai, Martine Degno, Sonia Caceres, Sofia Baltis, Tayaba Fiaz, Vanessa Bravo and Laura Iorio, and a team of dedicated volunteers.
Together, they gave their time and their expertise to brightening the smiles of so many in my community, and on behalf of everyone who calls Vaudreuil-Soulanges home, I say thank you.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to offer my solidarity with the movement led by young women for human rights in Iran. At great risk to their own safety, people are taking to the streets demanding justice and freedom following the horrific murder of Mahsa Amini. Their courage in the face of hard state repression is inspiring. Protesters are being tear-gassed, beaten, and shot for asserting their rights. This is appalling. The Iranian regime must stop the killing and respect its citizens' right to demonstrate. Canada has an important role to play in upholding human rights and international law. We must be vocal in supporting an independent investigation into the death of Mahsa Amini, and the federal government must ensure that those fleeing violence in Iran can obtain asylum here. Women's rights are human rights. I stand with the women in Iran whose rights are under attack, and I will speak out whenever the rights of women and gender-diverse people are threatened. We can never be silent in the face of injustice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Loire. Mr. Speaker, today I am highlighting the 100th anniversary of the Montcalm farm. For the Montcalm family, farming is a family affair, but it is above all a matter of passion. In 1922, Joseph Montcalm bought a farm in Saint-Louis-de-Gonzague. His son Roch and his wife Corona then took over the dairy business. Thereafter, brothers Maurice, François and Marc all joined forces to propel the business forwards. Now, the Montcalm generation of cousins are continuing their tradition of excellence. A fifth generation is currently growing and taking an interest in the agricultural world. Mr. Speaker, it's by always being ahead of their time that they have been able to prepare for the future. Mr. Speaker, when I talk about the Quebec agricultural model, I do so with pride, but also with I think of the Montcalm family. Family farms on a human scale with farmers involved in their community. That is what supply management allows. The 1922 Montcalms would be proud to see the evolution of the family business and the impressive contribution of their extended family, both on the farm and throughout our region. It is therefore with great joy, Mr. Speaker, but above all with great affection, that I congratulate the Montcalm family.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, the great people of Portapique and indeed all of Nova Scotia want and deserve answers. The sad and diabolical tragedy that visited our normally idyllic part of the world continues to haunt our thoughts. All Nova Scotians have been failed by the flawed proceedings of the Mass Casualty Commission, for which we all held out much hope for answers. The sick and twisted story is further marred by the political interference of the former Minister for Public Safety and the inappropriate dance performed with Commissioner Lucky. Nova Scotians deserve respect, not your political cover-ups. Sorry, sir. Phone records were withheld for 2.5 years for politically motivated reasons by a former Liberal staffer. Nova Scotians deserve answers, not fiction, not foolishness, not falsified reality, and certainly not your fabrication. The former Minister for Public Safety needs to resign.
The honourable member for Halifax.
Mr. Speaker, last week I attended the 40th annual Fallen Peace Officers Memorial Service in Halifax, honoring Nova Scotian peace officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty. This year, the name of RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson has been added to the Fallen Peace Officers Monument. Constable Stevenson was a 23-year veteran of the force who tragically lost her life during the Nova Scotia mass shooting in 2020. Watching her husband and children lay a wreath in her name was a somber reminder of the risk that these brave officers take to keep us safe. Tragically, in recent months, 4 more officers across Canada have died in the line of duty, so I invite all members in this House to join me in expressing our sincere condolences to the families and loved ones of Constable Angel Hong of the Toronto Police Service, Constables Morgan Russell and Devin Northrup of the Simcoe Police Service, and RCMP Constable Shaylin Yang and Burnaby. These officers put themselves in harm's way to serve and protect others, and we will remember their sacrifices forever.
Question orale, oral questions. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Canadians now receive their bill for the $500 billion of inflationary deficit that is boosting interest rates. For a family that bought a house in Quebec with a mortgage 5 years ago that is now renewing their mortgage, they will pay another $7,000 per year. The Prime Minister said that the government would take on debt so Canadians don't need to do so. So who's going to pay for that additional cost for that mortgage? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I will answer his questions shortly, but today I would like to underscore the 40 days that have come since Mahsa Amini, and this is a senseless murder, and we'd like to underscore the courage of Iranian women who are protesting to show how violent and cruel this regime is.
The world gather today and tonight. We hear you and stand with you, and we'll continue to hold the Iranian regime to account for its abhorrent, heinous behavior.
The
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Canadians are now getting the bill for the Prime Minister's $500 billion of inflationary deficits that first drove up inflation and now drive up interest rates. For a typical family that bought a typical home with a typical mortgage 5 years ago but are now up for renewal, they're paying $7,000 more per year. The Prime Minister said that the government was going to take on all this debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to, as if they don't have to pay back government debt. If that were the case, though, then who's going to pay the extra mortgage payments for these families?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, through the pandemic, we made the decision to support Canadian families, to support workers, to support small businesses, to make sure Canadians could hold on and to make sure our economy could hold on through an unprecedented, historic pandemic. At the same time, we were there to support Canadians as the economy gets going again, and we're there to support them now with help with the GST rebate that's going to arrive in the coming weeks, and with direct support for dental care and for low-income renters. The question, Mr. Speaker, is why are Conservative politicians not choosing to support Canadians on dental and rental?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister caused this inflation crisis. Even Mark Carney, who will be the successor to the current Liberal leader, is saying that inflation is a homegrown problem. He's right. It's caused by the $500 billion of inflationary deficits that have been up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest that we pay. And today, rates went up another half point, meaning many families will be handing in their keys to the banks because they won't be able to afford those bills. Has the Prime Minister been briefed by his officials on how many Canadians will lose their homes because of the higher interest rates that his inflationary policies have caused?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, inflation is a worldwide problem right now, but it is a challenge faced by Canadian families that we will continue to support them through. That's why we're delivering supports for families right now in a targeted way, a doubling of the GST credit that will arrive in the coming weeks in their bank accounts, moving forward on support for dental care, moving forward on support for low-income renters, things that the Conservative Party is continuing not just to vote against but to block, and we will continue to do more. We will continue to be there for Canadians during the challenging times ahead, because that's what Canadians expect of their government.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
What they've come to expect of this government is that it raises the cost of living. The cost of government is driving up the cost of goods, and now the cost of interest. $200 billion of the $500 billion in deficits had nothing to do with COVID, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer. And even that so-called COVID spending included the ArriveCan app, an app that could have been designed in a weekend for $250,000 but cost $54 million. The government claims that $1.2 million of that went to a company called Think On. That company says it didn't get that money. Who did?
Here. Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the appropriate ministers are looking into this and making sure that the mistake that was made by public servants in sharing information is followed up on. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, it's important to remember that we did a lot of things in a very unprecedented way during an unprecedented pandemic, including delivering CERB checks within weeks of people having to stay home from jobs in ways that were unthinkable only a few months before. We were there to support small businesses with record support so that we could come roaring back as an economy immediately after. Yes, we stepped up in a very rapid way to support Canadians, and that's what Canadians know got us through this pandemic.
The Honourable Opposition.
The Prime Minister can't tell us who got the $1.2 million. He blames public servants for the mistake. Surely, in the weeks since he learned out about it, he could have learned of this misappropriation. He could have found out where the money went, but he hasn't. It's not the only example. There's also the $400,000 trip to London, of which there was a $6,000 suite for one night. Just another example of the massive Liberal waste that has contributed to the inflationary deficits we now face. So if he can't tell us which company got the money, can he at least tell us who got the $6,000 a night room?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
As Canadians know, we had a large delegation, including a number of previous prime ministers and former governor generals in London for.
To interrupt the Right Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition asked a question. I'm sure he wants to hear the answer. So I'm just going to ask everyone to calm down and so we can hear the answer. the Right Honourable Prime Minister from the top, please.
That's a lot of work. Mr. Speaker, to mark the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Canada had a large delegation that went to London to the funeral, including a number of former Prime Ministers and former Governors General. We stayed in the same hotel. Mr. Speaker, having a strong Canadian presence there as one of the top realm countries was expected of us, and it was important to see all Canadians so well represented together at the funerals.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, some laws and initiatives have an impact on the budget so that a royal consent can be adopted when there is a vote in the House. It's symbolic, but it's part of the rules. Given inflation that is undermining the budgets of seniors, they're being discriminated towards by this government, those who are 65 to 75 who depend on government assistance. So I would like to underscore the urgency of an economic update, and they should increase OAS so that seniors can receive support. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this is good news that seniors today are living much longer and they're in better health than before, decades before. This is good news. But because of this, we have too many seniors who run out of their savings and pensions before the end of their lives. And that's why we recognize that from 75 years of age, seniors have more costs and greater needs. That's why we decided to increase old age security for seniors over 75. We want to be there in a proportionate way for those who have the most need. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. I would ask the Prime Minister to listen to his answer again. It also has an impact on the budget, as if he wanted to get an authorization from his friend Charles, who is much older. But now we're heading towards the toughest season for the health of people. We're facing another wave of COVID, and the healthcare system is crumbling because of financial issues. We don't want to look at jurisdictional issues, but can he transfer the healthcare funding without strings? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadian law on health is in place to make sure that Canadians from across this country receive the same quality and accessibility of healthcare services everywhere in the country. That's the role of the federal government. We want to make sure that all Canadians have a good healthcare system. The provinces deliver this healthcare system, and the federal government is very happy to be a partner with the provinces to fund these services, and we are in talks with the provinces to deliver results and services that Canadian, including Quebecers, need. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Today, the Bank of Canada has once again hiked its interest rate, and inflation management is not just up to the Bank of Canada. We also have to do our share. Many economists are calling for a recession. People are expecting us to prepare for the future. When will the government stop hiding behind the Bank of Canada and show some leadership? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what this government is doing. Not only are we remaining responsible fiscally to preserve the necessary means if the economic situation gets worse, but we're also here with assistance that is targeted for those who need it, whether it's the 11 million households that will receive a GST refund in coming weeks, or direct assistance to families for dental care, or rental assistance for low-income families. We're helping Canadians to get through these tough times in coming months. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
The Prime Minister's own former economic advisor has raised concerns of increased household costs because of interest rates going up. He says an average family with a new mortgage before today's new increase could see an increase of $11,000 in extra costs to their annual budget. Most families do not have the ability to absorb that kind of hit. When will this government help families that are reeling with the shock of increasing interest rates?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know how much families are concerned both with rising prices right now and with the specter of increasing interest rates that are going to continue to put pressure on their mortgages, on their savings. This is why we're taking action right now in a targeted way to ensure that we're supporting millions of households, millions of families with GST rebates, with help for dental care, with help for low-income renters, and we're going to continue to make sure we have the capacity to respond if the economic situation worsens for Canadians over the coming months.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, record inflation is a choice for these Liberals after causing it with the $500 billion of inflationary deficit, much of which has nothing to do with COVID. They blame everything and everyone else. The Bank of Canada governor says that inflation is homegrown. Another past one says that it's domestic too. And now struggling Canadians are facing yet another rate hike that makes a bad situation worse. The Prime Minister isn't letting up. He's raising taxes, and worse, he's still spending. Canadians know how we got here. They just want to know how he could be so irresponsible.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, record inflation is hitting families around the globe, but that's cold comfort to Canadians who are struggling as well, which is why we are stepping up to directly support them with a GST rebate, with direct help for low-income renters, and for dental care. My question is, and the Canadians' questions, to be quite frank, is why are Conservative politicians continue to stand against dental care for Canadian kids, stand against support for low-income families? These are things that would help people tangibly in the months to come, but Conservatives are not just not supporting, they're actually actively trying to block them.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions in the future, but he doesn't get it. They told Canadians that interest rates would stay low. They told Canadians that we'd have deflation, not inflation, and that it would be temporary. They spent $500 billion. That's more than every Prime Minister in the history of this country combined. They flooded the market with cheap cash, and they said, don't worry about it. And now the Bank of Canada is cleaning up their mess by raising rates. Will he finally pull his weight around here and stop fueling the fire that he himself has lit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
It takes a special kind of Conservative politician to talk about initiatives like the CERB and the CEBA as flooding the market with cheap cash. Mr. Speaker, we are there to support Canadians in a direct way, as we had their backs during the pandemic, as we continue to have their backs right now with the high cost of living. We're always going to be there to support Canadians. Why aren't Conservative politicians stepping up to support Canadians on dental and rental care? That's the question Canadians are asking them.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
This Prime Minister's disastrous inflationary policies and reckless spending on the backs of Canadians is sending more families into homeless shelters and food banks, up 30%. This Prime Minister's climate zealot ideology is keeping billions of dollars of investment in our responsible Canadian energy sector in the ground, increasing home heating costs 50% to 100%, and making more families stay freezing in the dark. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for his inflationary problems that caused the Bank of Canada's interest rate hikes because of just...
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm having a hard time following the particular logic that the Conservatives are putting forward today, saying that the reason people are struggling is because we were there to help them in record amounts during the pandemic. We were there to keep food on the table for families struggling from having lost their jobs because of the pandemic. We were there to keep small businesses open, restaurants, neighborhood stores open through a pandemic because we were there with supports because otherwise money wasn't coming in. We invested in the Canadian economy to get through these difficult difficult times, and Conservatives say we shouldn't have done any of that.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
Well, let's look at real responsible allies of ours. Let's look at Japan, Switzerland, Taiwan, Hong Kong, who took the right steps and kept inflation under 3%. They didn't print boatloads of money that was valueless and make sure that their citizens got put further into debt. And now Canada has the highest interest rate in the entire G7, pushing more families to food banks and homeless shelters, like we said before. The more this Prime Minister spends, the higher interest rates, the higher just inflation goes. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for just inflation causing higher Bank of Canada interest rate hikes, yes or no?
I just want to remind the honourable members that you can't do indirectly what you can't do directly, and it's nice to play with words and everything, but please, it's a little obvious there. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have worked closely with allies over the past number of months and number of years to ensure that we're increasing our opportunities for citizens, that we're increasing our resilience in our supply chains, and we're working together. Global inflation is hitting all of our allies, whether it be the United States, the UK, France, Germany. All our major partners are facing these challenges. Canadians are doing slightly better than folks in those countries, but that's cold comfort to too many Canadians who are struggling. That's why we're stepping up with direct and more help with a return on the GST credit that's going to land in Canadians' bank accounts in the coming weeks, and dental and rental support that inexplicably Conservatives continue to oppose.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we all remember that the Finance Minister said that she could afford to increase debt to record levels because of low interest rates. But now that she's gunning for the PM's job, she's changing her message to warn Canadians about the dangers of rising interest rates and that the government needs to tighten its belt. But millions of Canadians can't make ends meet. Can the Prime Minister confirm that he's going to cancel the carbon tax? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers and all Canadians know full well that climate change is a reality that we have to prepare for. And we also have to look at it as an opportunity to grow our economy by going greener. And that's exactly what we're doing by putting a price on pollution. We can no longer pollute freely in our country, and the Conservatives want to go back to that time, but we know that we have to move forward. We have to be there to put a price on pollution and put money back into the pockets of Canadians, and that's exactly what we're doing. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. What's clear for Quebecers and Canadians, Mr. Speaker, is that the Bank of Canada's key rate went up for the sixth time to 3.7.5%. It has an impact on mortgages and that the money Canadians need to leave for living. Inflation, accelerated by historic Liberal spending, is taking a bite out of Canadians' pensions and wages. Meanwhile, the PM is turning a deaf ear to Canadians' frustrations. When is he going to act with compassion and stop raising taxes? Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives continue to talk about cutting services that Canadians are counting on, whether it's EI or pensions, we are going to be there to help Canadians who are vulnerable and also to invest in the middle class. And we're going to continue to fight against climate change. We know that investing to fight against climate change is the best way to prepare a robust economy with opportunities for everyone in coming years. And that's exactly what we're going to continue to do. And it's Conservatives want to encourage us to cut services. We're not going to do this. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. The government's dental check is supposed to help ease the cost of living for families. That's the title of this bill, Cost of Living Relief Measures. But if the PM wanted to help families, he could have increased the child benefit, and all families would have benefited. But instead, he creates a dental check that does not help all families, discriminates against Quebec families, and pushes parents through the bureaucracy of the CRA. The PBO has confirmed that Quebec children are half as likely to qualify as Canadian children. What is he going to do to reverse this discrimination? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. We know that too many families don't have the means to pay for dental care that they need. The dental benefit will be offered to all Quebec families who are eligible, including those who are covered by public insurance. If eligible families have expenses that are not covered by the existing provincial system, they will have access to our benefit. We're going to continue to work to make life more family affordable for all. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the worst part is that the Dental Quebec discriminates against Quebecers because they're already paying taxes in Quebec to cover children's dental care. As a result, 23% of Quebec's children will only receive 13% of federal funding. That's roughly half of Quebec's youth excluded from the NDP Liberal program. Basically, Quebecers will pay taxes to cover the dental care of their children, and with this program, they'll also pay for the dental care of children in other provinces. Thanks to who, Mr. Speaker? The NDP and the Liberals. How can the PM justify this? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we made the choice to make sure that all families in this country can pay for dental care for their children. This includes families in Quebec who will have access to this benefit, and we know that this is something that should go beyond political concerns, but unfortunately the Bloc is opposed to offering dental care to children who cannot afford it. And we are going to be there to help children, and we're going to be there to help families during these tough times.
Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government continues with wasteful spending. There's We Charity, storytellers for the Prime Minister, the Infrastructure Bank, fridges for Loblaws, checks to MasterCard, the Arrive scam app, and expensive hotels, just to name a few. Wow. Hardworking Canadians who send their money to Ottawa are not being respected. Canadians cannot afford this costly coalition. Will the Liberals end their inflationary spending?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the member for Kelowna Lake Country was really concerned about hardworking Canadians, she would drop her opposition to supporting families with dental care for their kids. She would stop her opposition to sending a $500 check to the lowest income renters across the country who need help making ends meet right now. The Conservative Party continues to talk about trying to be there for people, but when it comes time to stand up and vote to help them, not only are they voting against it, but they're doing everything they can to kill our dental and rental bill. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker. When will they do the right thing and support low-income and middle-class Canadians?
The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Interest rates are up again, and the Bank of Canada says more raises are coming. Now the bank says that inflation reflects Canadian, domestic factors, not the global factors that this government keeps blaming. The government said interest rates will remain low, and then they went on a spending spree. They said it was irresponsible not to spend. They said there would be no inflation, and then they said inflation would just be temporary. And now inflation's out of control and Canadians are paying more. That's right. Will the Prime Minister finally admit that his spending has made life unaffordable for Canadians?
That's right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, during this unprecedented pandemic, all parties worked together to deliver the kinds of supports that Canadians needed, whether it was CERB, whether it was the CEBA account for small businesses, whether it was support for seniors, whether it's support for students. We continued to step up. This government led the way, but we had the support of members across the aisle for many of these initiatives. Now, the members across the aisle are saying we shouldn't have been there for Canadians. We shouldn't have spent that money supporting Canadians with the CERB and the CEBA. Well, I ask Canadians to think back over the past couple of years and imagine what it would have been like had we not been there to support them.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the problem is that the PM has spent $200 million more than what the Canadians needed to get through the pandemic. But the Prime Minister is used to not answering questions. He skirts questions. He tries to answer other things. Every time Canadians tell me, the Prime Minister, will he one day answer a question? And I have a simple one to ask him today. Can he tell us who slept in the famous $6,000 suite in London? Simple question. Who slept in that room? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. While the Conservative Party is worrying about attacking the government and attacking on our presence at the funeral of Her Majesty. We're going to continue to be there to deliver tangible things for Canadians with the GST tax rebate that will arrive in coming weeks in the bank accounts of 11 million Canadians, but also with help for dental care and help for low-income renters. These last two benefits are initiatives that the Conservatives are against. Why, Mr. Speaker, are these Conservatives not there for Canadians? The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering how we can say that and still justify the fact that you're sleeping in a $6,000 room. Many Canadians can't sleep in a $6,000 suite. Earlier, Mr. Speaker, I was wrong. It's not $200 million that they spent more during the pandemic. That had nothing to do with the pandemic. It is $200 billion. That's the reality. So when the Prime Minister, will he stop blaming everyone and take responsibility for his incompetency? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we all work together to make sure that Canadians have the necessary support to get through the pandemic, whether it was the emergency CERB benefit or employer benefits or small business or senior benefits. We all work together. And the government did deliver a lot of assistance for Canadians so that they could get through those tough times. And now that our economy is coming back strong, we see that many Canadians are still experiencing difficulties. And that's why we're helping them with dental care and rental support. And the Conservatives are opposed to that.
Member for Nunavut.
Indigenous children have been torn from their families, communities, and cultural practices for decades. Yesterday, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal reaffirmed our knowledge that this government continues to willfully discriminate against Indigenous children. This government must listen to advocates and make sure every child affected is eligible for compensation and leaves no one behind. Will this government find solutions outside of the courts so children do not have to wait any longer?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, exactly what we did was work directly with Indigenous peoples, First Nations, and other Indigenous peoples to ensure that we were moving forward on supporting the people who needed it, on getting that compensation to those people who'd been harmed by practices of governments past. We are continuing to stand with AFN, Trout, and Mushum to make sure that we are working to deliver compensation to these kids as quickly as possible. We know they deserve compensation. We want to be there for them as we have always said we would be.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Are getting rich off the backs of Canadians, but the Liberals keep handing them billions of dollars in public money. These same companies are fueling the climate crisis. A new report from the International Institute on Sustainable Development confirms that paying big oil to reduce their emissions is a bad investment. These handouts mean less investments in climate solutions that support workers. When will the government stop subsidizing big oil and start making them pay what they owe?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a long-standing disagreement between the Liberal Party on this side and the NDP on that side about the use of investing, for example, in CCUS technology to ensure that we can decarbonize our oil and gas production so we can continue to deliver the energy that the world needs while we go through this energy transition at lower emission levels. That's why we're working closely with industry on decarbonization measures. That's why we put a price on pollution to give a clear price incentive to companies to reduce their carbon emissions. This is the kind of work we are doing because we know we need to be there for workers and build a strong future.
The Honourable Member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, handguns have ripped our communities apart. We have seen this firsthand in Brampton, in the Greater Toronto area, the Toronto Danforth shooting, the Quebec City mosque attack, the Edmonton shooting, all senseless handgun violence that claimed loved ones too soon. While Conservatives are trying to make assault weapons legal again, the Prime Minister and Minister of Public Safety are taking swift action to protect Canadians. Could the Right Honourable Prime Minister please share with this House how the handgun freeze will protect all Canadian communities?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague from Brampton South for her hard work and her advocacy on this matter. We are taking the strongest action in a generation to keep communities safe from gun violence, including a national freeze on handguns. Because it's time to get handguns off the streets, out of abusive homes, and out of the hands of criminals. We will never apologize for acting with urgency to protect Canadians from gun violences. We will let the Conservative Party explain for itself why they believe that weapons meant for the battlefield should remain in our neighbourhoods.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, Commissioner Lucky states on the audio file, and I quote, "The minister wants to speak to me. Once again, I dropped the ball," close quote. It goes on, and I quote, "I've apologized to the minister. I'm waiting for the Prime Minister to call me so I can apologize," end of quote. Ooh. The former Minister of Public Safety needs to stop the deception, the fiction, the fabrication, and the disinformation. He needs to respect Nova Scotians and resign for the actions and political interference in the investigations of the death of 22 Nova Scotians and an unborn child. Will the Prime Minister accept the resignation of this minister?
Hear, hear. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as always, our thoughts are with the families as they continue to grieve, and my efforts are focused squarely, as they have been since day one, on supporting them. As the Commissioner and the Minister have clearly stated, the decision on what information is released and when is the police's alone, and that was fully respected.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, on this Liberal RCMP political interference scandal, the Minister continues to avoid accountability by using very specific legal words concerning ministerial directives to the RCMP. But we're not asking about legal directives, we're asking about political interference, Mr. Speaker. Did the Minister, his Chief of Staff, or anyone from his office discuss the forthcoming Liberal gun control legislation with the RCMP Commissioner or her staff between the dates of the Nova Scotia mass murder and the April 28th press conference? Did they politicize the deaths of 22 people, Mr. Speaker? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, Canadians expect their government to respond quickly and effectively to crises and answer their questions. But it's interesting to see how Conservative politicians are changing their tune. I will remind the member that her colleagues from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes and West Nova asked on at least 3 occasions between May 20th and May 28th, 2020, when will all of this information finally be made transparent and public? I'm focused on supporting the families affected by this tragedy and taking action to ensure that it never happens again.
The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Evidence of this cover-up is coming out every day. We've just learned that the RCMP Director of Media Relations, who also happens to be a former Liberal staffer, Mr. Speaker, is being investigated for covering up the audio recording that's at the centre of this entire scandal. That same audio recording has the Commissioner directly contradicting the Minister. There are lies here, Mr. Speaker. So who's getting fired, the Minister, the Commissioner, or both, Mr. Speaker?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, as all Canadians know, when an emergency arises, accurate and timely information is crucial. As the Commissioner stated, keeping the government informed through timely and accurate information sharing is not interference. It is standard procedure, and these situational updates are provided without compromising the operational integrity of an investigation, end quote. Canadians rightfully had questions about the public communications that occurred during and after our country's most devastated intended mass casualty. That's why that's a focus of our inquiry.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Emergency Preparedness politicized a criminal investigation and the worst mass murder in the history of Canada. He can deny it all he wants, but the evidence is overwhelming. He pressured the RCMP Commissioner to disclose sensitive information to advance the Liberal agenda, whereas he had already been notified that this information could undermine the investigation. Today, here's my question. When is the Prime Minister going to fire him? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, obviously, our thoughts go to the families who are grieving, and our efforts are focused on assistance to bring to them. As the Commissioner and the Minister have already said many times, the decision concerning the information disclosed and when to do so was up to the police, and it was fully respected in this situation and in all other situations. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, at the Rouleau Commission, 3 different police forces confirmed that the Emergencies Act was not necessary to end the convoy occupation in Ottawa. The RCMP, the OPP, and the Ottawa Police. They all said that they did not need the Emergencies Act. The RCMP even advised the federal government before it invoked the Emergencies Act that it had all the tools required, and in fact, rather, that all the tools had not yet been used. So can the Prime Minister explain why he invoked the Emergencies Act against the recommendations of the RCMP? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, invoking the Emergencies Act is not to be taken lightly. It was something major, and it is when such an emergencies is invoked, that includes a public inquiry to shed light on everything that happened and the decisions leading up to it. That is why, Mr. Speaker, that we are conducting this commission, this inquiry, and that is why I'm eager to testify before that commission so that Canadians can understand why it was both necessary and done responsibly, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Yes, I'm eager to hear the Prime Minister testify as well. Inspector Robert Bernier of the Ottawa Police confirmed today that it was not the Emergencies Act that led to the ending of the occupation. The police operation had already been designed the day before on February 13th, when the police did not even know that the Emergencies Act would be invoked. Mr. Bernier confirmed that they carried out this operation without thinking of the Emergencies Act because they already had all the powers they needed to act. Once again, could the Prime Minister to explain to us why he invoked the Emergencies Act if it was useless? Was it to do what so he could do just like his father? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, no Canadian is surprised that those who were opposed to the Emergencies Act are still opposed to it today. And those of us who believe that it was necessary continue to believe that it was necessary. And Mr. Speaker, that is why we launched a public inquiry to shed light on all the reasons why it was invoked so that Canadians can learn impartially and in a nonpartisan fashion why it was the right thing to do, why it was done in a limited and proportional fashion, and that it worked to put an end to the truckers' occupation that was illegal.
Mr. Speaker, these Liberals are completely out of touch with the economic crisis that Canadians are facing because of their reckless spending. Interest rates went up again today. The cost of groceries are at a 40-year high, forcing too many Canadian families having to use a food bank. And it's becoming a luxury to heat your home in this country. On top of that, they will be raising the carbon tax, Mr. Speaker, making everything more expensive. Well, they can't to raise the carbon tax.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives continue to point out that we were there in too large a measure for small businesses, for families, for workers who struggled through this pandemic. We disagree with them on that because we saw our economy recover faster than just about any of our allied countries. But on top of that, they continue to be saying that they're concerned about the issues facing Canadians in their day-to-day lives, and yet they continue not just to stand against, but to attempt to block our help for Canadians on dental care, on support for low-income renters. Why do they continue to stand against support for Canadians?
Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, $200 billion had nothing to do with COVID. It did not actually help Canadians through COVID. Canadians cannot afford this Liberal NDP coalition. It's actually making everything more expensive for Canadians, and that's why interest rates went up today. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask again, will they give Canadians a break and cancel their planned tax hikes?
Right Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives can continue to talk about cuts to EI, continue to talk about cuts to pensions, continue to talk about making pollution free again. The reality is we're not only going to continue to be there to support Canadians through these difficult times, but we're going to stand against the Conservatives' opposition to our plan to support Canadians with dental care, to support low-income renters with direct help as we get forward into this winter. We know that Canadians need help now. Canadians are also wondering, why are the Conservatives continuing to stand against support for Canadians who need it?
The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
On this side of the House, we're not against families. We're for families. Let's talk about those folks. Let's talk about those ordinary Canadians that are working hard to make ends meet. Those folks that are raising their kids. Those folks that are trying to pay their bills. Those folks that are driving their children to hockey games, etc. These are the folks that watch their heating bill double over the last year. These are the folks that are going to watch their heating bill this winter go up by another 30%. These are the folks for whom many cannot afford the $100 extra a month that is going to be. So my question for you, Mr. Prime Minister, through the chair, is this. Will you exercise some compassion and take away your plan to triple
Prime Minister?
From Lethbridge was talking about being there for folks raising families, and that's exactly one of the things that we are focused on right now, in delivering support for families who can't afford to send their kids to the dentist. We know there are far too many Canadians looking at the various bills they're facing and knowing, sorry, we're not going to be able to send our kids to the dentist this year. That is wrong, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're moving forward with $1,300 in support over the next 2 years so that all families can send their kids to the dentist. Why, Mr. Speaker, Conservatives who want to support families standing...
The Honourable Member for Laval-Les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, all Canadians deserve a healthy environment and safe communities. Since the last reform of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act 20 years ago, chemicals have become more and more a part of our daily life and of our economy. To ensure Canadians' safety, our country needs an Environmental Protection Act that addresses 21st century problems with the help of 21st century science. Can the Prime Minister please update us on Bill S5? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Laval-Les-Îles for his question and his hard work. The right to a healthy environment recognizes that all Canadians deserve safe communities and a healthy environment. We pledge to adopt a federal law that codifies these principles, and we're going to follow up on it. I hope that the Conservatives will stop trying to delay this bill, as they have done over the past week, and allow it to go to committee as soon as possible to help it pass instead of filibustering. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the budget of Canadian families is taking a real hit. Interest rates are up. Groceries are up. Home heating is up. Gas is up. In fact, everything we buy is up. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realize that the last thing Canadians need is a tax hike? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Of course, Mr. Speaker, that is why that we're not increasing taxes. We are here to help Canadians. We're here to help them with dental care, with investments to help low-income renters, initiatives, in fact, that the member across the way is fiercely opposed to. We are calling on the Conservative Party to stop blocking this bill on dental and rental so that we can help Canadian families as quickly as possible.
Member for our Foothills.
The only help the Liberals are offering Canadians is the triple threat. They've tripled the debt, they're tripling the carbon tax, and in less than 2 years, they've tripled interest rates. This is a threat that Canadians can't afford. Soup is up 30%, bread and potatoes up 17%, margarine up 38%. These aren't luxury items from a Liberal cocktail party. These are staples that Canadians rely on every single day. So to the Prime Minister, how many Canadian families are going to have to rely on food banks before you cancel your plans to triple the taxes on food, fuel, and home heating?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the average family of four in this country, in the jurisdictions where the carbon tax backstop applies, receive more money from the climate action incentive than they pay on average in the climate change, the price on pollution. We are moving forward in a way that both fights climate change and supports the families that need it. Like we're moving forward on supports for low-income renters and for families that can't pay for their kids to go to the dentist. But Conservative politicians are standing against support for dental care, support for low-income rentals. Why?
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
It is clear that the Prime Minister has become too comfortable with the luxuries he hasn't earned. He doesn't understand the burdens that are carrying on every Canadian. Burdens that the Liberals are tripling by tripling the carbon tax, tripling the debt, and now tripling the interest rates. Will the Prime Minister end his planned tax hikes on food, fuel, and home heating? Or is he yearning to the days of his father, when Canadians who couldn't afford their mortgage were dropping their house keys off at the bank before taking their families to the food bank?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
There is much misinformation floating around out there, and that's why we're happy to put things very clear for Canadians, despite the approach that the members of the opposition are taking. Let's consider how families in the communities of the opposition front benches benefit from our climate action rebates. A family of four in the opposition leader's riding has received over $550 this year alone, over $620 in the Deputy Finance Critics ridings, and over $800 so far this year in the member opposite's riding. We are there to support families even as we fight climate change.
Member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, the situation in Afghanistan remains heartbreaking to this day, as Afghan women and interpreters helped our country for years, and they've been targeted by the Taliban since they've taken over in Afghanistan over a year ago. It goes without saying that it's our duty to help them get to safety. Can the Prime Minister inform this House on the progress that's been made so far towards this government's commitment to resettle at least 40,000